Hi, BookTube. Or should I say Blues Tube, or Vinyl Tube, or Record Tube, or whatever. Because I come to you today not to discuss books, but to discuss music. But I do have a couple of relevant books to talk about, just to keep our toes in the BookTube waters. The first of these I've read. This is Lane Where the Blues Began by Lomax. A name that'll probably be familiar to you if you're into blues or like old-time folk music or jazz music. He is probably most famous as being the first person to record Muddy Waters and Leadbelly. He also worked for the Library of Congress and recorded Blind Willie McTell. Had a really famous long session with Jelly Roll Morton, pretty close to the end of his life. And this book is his memoir of traveling through the American South, and finding and meeting and recording a lot of said artists. It's probably kind of a tough sell if you're not a fan of the music, but if you are, it's definitely worth reading. And then the second one is a recent pickup of mine. At the half-price books clearance section, I always home in on the Penguin Classics whenever I see them, and I was happy to find this one. This is Clarence Major's Dirty Bird Blues, a novel about a blues musician kind of struggling to balance his music career with his family. I just kind of assumed, it being an author that I'd never heard of, a novel about a blues musician and being a Penguin Classic, I just assumed this was like a novel from the 40s or 50s. This novel was published in 1996, which makes it the first Penguin Classic that I'm aware of, and it may be the only one, that is younger than I am. Which, it had to happen eventually, but I figured I would have lost like all my hair by the time it did. Anyway, though, I wanted to just kind of showcase some of my favorite blues albums. Just in short, my music taste has three focuses, which are first generation punk rock, like 70s and early 80s. First generation rock and roll, 50s mainly, Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Buddy Holly, that kind of stuff. And number three, blues. I tend to favor acoustic blues. Like, for example, I love Muddy Waters. I love pretty much everything Muddy Waters ever did. But my favorite Muddy Waters album, by a pretty wide margin, is Folk Singer, which is kind of like his unplugged album, the album that he made to cash in on the resurgence in popularity of folk music in the early 60s. It's worth checking out if you're looking for not just a good blues album or good folk album, but a good sounding album. There are certain pressings of this on vinyl that are really sought after by the audiophile types. And the other CD I had, if there's one release from all of these that I can recommend, it would be the complete recordings of Robert Johnson, which is the closest thing that blues has to a Bible. And then on to vinyl. I will start out with R.L. Burnside. This is his first recordings. He was first recorded by George Mitchell in 1968. About 10 years later was recorded and filmed by Alan Lomax. And then kind of had his third discovery in the 90s by the guys at Fat Possum Records. And he made a couple of of albums that were just him solo, maybe had something of a backing band. Then somebody had the bright idea to have a punk rock band back him, and the album that resulted from this is A Ass Pocket of Whiskey, which is about 40 minutes of just this really second-rate punk rock band making just a huge racket, and R.L. Burnside, just barely kind of keeping his head above water, barely, keeping control of the whole thing. In the Penguin Guide to Blues Recordings, or the Penguin Guide to Blues, one of those big reference books that gives you, like just a list of every major blues album ever recorded, and like a star rating for each one. This, I believe, is the only album that has 2-star ratings. It has one reviewer that gave it 1 star out of 4, and another who gave it, I think, 3. In the little corner of blues enthusiasts, this is kind of a controversial album. I've always loved it. I mean, I understand people who see it as a sacrilege or an insult to the genre, but I just think the music speaks for itself. I mean, the version of "Shake 'Em On Down" in here is great. I mean, it sounds like Led Zeppelin, if you're into Led Zeppelin. Then we have Mississippi John Hurt. This is a collection of the songs that he recorded in the 1920s. He made some recordings in the 1920s. They didn't really do well, and he just kind of gave up on that as a career. Still performed, but mainly went back to sharecropping, I believe, for about 30 years. And then in that folk and blues revival in the 60s, he was rediscovered and brought back out on tour and recorded about 3 albums in the 1960s. The first one is called Today. Second one, I believe, is the Immortal Mississippi John Hurt. And the third is Last Sessions. I think those are his best work. He's one of those guys who really did get better with age. He always sounded kind of like an old man, even when he was about 30 here. But he always had a very gentle, kind of sweet quality to his voice that only got better with age. And even in the 60s, his playing ability had not diminished at all. But I would still highly recommend you listen to everything that you can find by him. And then we have a copy of Blind Willie McTell's Atlanta 12-string, very nicely chewed up copy, thanks to Rosie. I mean, it had a corner chopped out of it already, so I wasn't really worried about the condition of this thing that much. One of my all-time favorite voices, one of my all-time favorite guitarists. He is one of those guys who recorded in the 20s and 30s, did most of his famous recording in that period. And then after that was in the studio just kind of sporadically. He had a session with the Library of Congress. He had his last sessions, which are also on record. And then this comes from 1949, a session that he did. I think it's the best music that he ever recorded. His best playing, his best singing. The first side of this album is the best stretch of acoustic blues that you will find outside of Robert Johnson. And the last 2 I want to show off are 2 by Hound Dog Taylor. This is Hound Dog Taylor and the HouseRockers, self-titled debut, and then their follow-up album, Natural Boogie. Chicago blues, electric blues, but with kind of a punk rock sensibility, in the sense that it's very lo-fi, very rough sounding. And Taylor himself, I'm not meaning this as an insult, was kind of a limited musician. He was not a crazy soloist or anything like that. To paraphrase Taylor himself, he couldn't play shit, but he could make it sound good. And he could. And he did. I think these two albums are pretty much equal in terms of quality. I probably prefer this first one just because it was the first one I heard. But like with Mississippi John Hurt, you cannot go wrong with any Hound Dog Taylor. He's one of those guys who played for years and years just in bars and clubs in Chicago. And then finally in 1971, somebody had the good sense to get him in a studio and record a few albums. And we're lucky for that, because I want to say that he recorded these two albums and then a live album, and was dead just a few years later. And so those are the ones I wanted to show off. I have quite a few more blues albums down here, and as you can see, a pretty decent record collection outside of just those. About half of these are my wife's, and half are mine. Maybe a complete collection video someday. But anyway, thank you for watching.